And that's all the time we have tonight. But coming up next, Shannon Bream has part 2 of her exclusive interview with Vice President Mike Pence as he tours the Middle East. Shannon, last night you were broadcasting live from Jerusalem. You looked beautiful. Someone told me you did your own makeup, which I can't believe.
It's the Holy Land, land of miracles.
Oh, my God. And I cannot believe you look beautiful and you're back in Washington already. Take it away. You must be exhausted. Have a great show.
Thank you. We just made it back, Laura, just in time. We have more from Jerusalem and many other topics. But here's what we have coming up tonight. House Republicans rail against the FBI and the Justice Department as concerns emerge about bias and even a, quote, secret society against President Trump. Republican Congressman John Ratcliffe explains what's behind the sudden wave of skepticism and anger from Capitol Hill. And more from Jerusalem with Vice President Mike Pence after last night's exclusive in the Holy Land. Plus, hardline reaction from top Palestinian negotiator Saeed Erekat.
Because desperation will lead to desperate acts.
Plus, day 2 of hashtag Schumer sellouts. The left turns up the heat against top Democrats. A DACA recipient saying,
it's a betrayal.
We'll debate how far Schumer will have to go for the so-called dreamers. Welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream, back in Washington tonight. New tonight, reports that former FBI Director James Comey may again appear before the House Judiciary Committee to answer for alleged inconsistencies in his testimony about the Hillary Clinton email investigation. That is according to GOP Congressman John Ratcliffe. He will be with us live in just minutes. Former Director Comey was interviewed by the special counsel last year, according to the New York Times, and the investigation into Russia collusion and potential obstruction of justice has reached the ranks of the president's cabinet. Fox News confirming today, Attorney General Jeff Sessions met with Mueller's team of investigators last week, we understand, for several hours. The news comes as House Intelligence Republicans are blasting the FBI and the DOJ for what they consider unchecked bias, even accusations of a secret society working against the president. Team coverage tonight at Henry on how both parties are trying to work this upheaval to their advantage. But first, let's begin with Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge with an update on the missing FBI text messages. Catherine.
Shannon, on the same day, a Justice Department official confirmed the Attorney General's special counsel interview. New text messages suggest senior FBI investigators were skeptical the Russia probe would uncover any wrongdoing. 2 days after special counsel Robert Mueller took over the Russia probe in May, newly released text messages between demoted FBI agent Peter Strzok and reassigned lawyer Lisa Page suggest they discussed the merits of joining Mueller's team. Strzok writes, "You and I both know the odds are nothing. If I thought it was likely, I'd be there, no question. I hesitate in part because of my gut sense and concern there's no big there. On Fox, Republican lawmakers said the texts are more evidence of political bias.
But I care a lot about the Department of Justice and the FBI, and it breaks my heart that we are having to have this conversation about 2 agents that only wanted to get the president. They didn't have any interest in clearing him.
Another Republican who read the text said the FBI officials talk about a, quote, secret society within days of President Trump's victory.
There was a society of at least 2 people, to include Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, that had a desire to keep Donald Trump from becoming president, and then an expressed intent to work against him after he was elected president.
In a cryptic text, Strzok writes, "I personally have a sense of unfinished business. Unleashed it with MYE, or mid-year exam, the FBI's code name for the Clinton email case. Now I need to fix it and finish it." The FBI blames a technical problem for a 5-month gap in the Strzok Page texts and would not comment on whether the Bureau has taken physical custody of their phones to recover the messages.
It is no coincidence, in my opinion, that we're missing texts that run from when the Russia investigation was launched right up to the point where you have the Mueller investigation being launched.
Writing in a tweet, President Trump called the missing text one of the biggest stories in a long time. The Senate senior Democrat called out Republicans for undermining Mueller.
But he shouldn't be thwarted in any way, and the diversion that they're trying to do, both with Mueller and with others, is not good for the country.
In a separate development, President Trump said the White House had no advance notice of Attorney General Jeff Sessions' special counsel interview last week.
No, I didn't, but I'm not at all concerned.
The president also denied media reports that FBI Director Christopher Wray threatened to quit after pressure to remove his deputy Andrew McCabe, a longtime lieutenant of fired FBI Director James Comey.
He did not even a little bit. Nope. And he's going to do a good job.
Those close to the president tell Fox they always expected Sessions would be interviewed, but they didn't know the timing. A White House spokesman emphasized transparency today and their cooperation with the special counsel. Shannon?
Catherine Herridge with the latest there. Thank you. We turn now to Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry. Following the increased political sniping between congressional Republicans and the nation's top law enforcement authorities, what can you tell us, Ed?
Well, good to see you back, Shannon. An extraordinary 24 hours, really, of leaks potentially damaging to the White House that suggests special counsel Robert Mueller wants to question President Trump about the firings of James Comey and retired General Michael Flynn. Plus, a leak today about Mueller interviewing Comey last year about his memos, laying out his discomfort with some of his conversations with the president. And then, as you noted at the top, another leak that Mueller questioned Attorney General Jeff Sessions for several hours last week. And then a leak that Sessions, at the president's urging, has been pressuring new FBI Director Christopher Wray to clean house and put in place Trump loyalists. The president today flat out denied that Wray has been pressured at all. The president's allies believe all of these leaks are an attempt to overshadow the impending release of that 4-page memo that will likely be damaging the FBI about Obama administration surveillance of Trump officials, plus all of these embarrassing FBI text messages you just heard about that the president declared is a major story. Breaking tonight, Republicans Ron Johnson and Chuck Grassley demanded to know how 5 months of those messages between FBI officials Strzok and Page suddenly went missing. All of this sparking much different reactions from Republicans and Democrats.
That secret society, we have an informant that's talking about a group that were holding secret meetings off-site. There's so much smoke here, we have to dig into it. This is not a distraction.
I think there has been a great deal of activity on the other side intending to either divert attention from Mueller or even stand in his way.
Now, amid all this turmoil, we learned today that Wray's Chief of Staff, James Rybicki, is out at the FBI. Significant because he was previously Chief of Staff to, yes, James Comey, and last month was grilled by the House Oversight Committee about the fact that he and Peter Strzok were involved in drafting Comey's statement exonerating Hillary Clinton before she was even interviewed by the FBI in that email probe. Sarah Sanders at the White House, by the way, reiterated today the president is supportive of rank-and-file FBI agents, but believes the leadership under Comey got politicized. She added the president now has 100% confidence in Wray to make necessary changes. And Shannon, it's also interesting that Sarah Sanders said that the White House is for full transparency when it comes to the House Intelligence Committee and that 4-page memo about alleged Obama surveillance of Trump officials. The idea that the White House wants transparency means that memo is likely to come out very soon.
All right, Ed Henry, thank you very much. Well, my next guest has seen some of the tens of thousands of texts exchanged by 2 FBI officials who sent anti-Trump messages during the 2016 campaign and beyond. He claims those texts include a reference to a, quote, secret society, and it could be something aimed at undermining the president. Joining us now, Texas Republican Congressman John Ratcliffe. Sir, great to have you with us tonight.
Hi, Shannon. Good to be with you.
All right,
Thanks for having me on.
We're happy to have you. Let me start by reading a little bit of what we heard from the Attorney General today on this, or late yesterday. He said, "We will leave no stone unturned to confirm with certainty why these text messages are not available to be produced, and we'll use every technology available to determine whether the missing messages are recoverable from another source." Are you confident you'll get those messages?
Well, there is some talk that maybe the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, already has them. I don't know if that's the case. I do have every faith and confidence that Mr. Sessions will overturn everything to try and locate these texts. A couple of things about that. You know, maybe they were lost. Maybe it was innocence. Maybe it's just a strange coincidence. But it is a coincidence that they relate to the time period around the establishment of Mueller as special counsel. And when you layer that on the fact that there have been other strange coincidences in this matter, it makes it hard to defend what the FBI has done here. The other thing about it, though, the other way to look at it, Shannon, is, you know, of the text messages that I've been able to review, you know, if the ones that I've seen are as alarming and as troubling and as stunning as they really are, it does make you wonder what the ones we haven't seen yet might actually include.
Now, have you seen this one that has the reference to the so-called secret society? And what can you tell us about that if you have?
I have. Actually, Chairman Gowdy and I were reviewing those text messages yesterday and came across that one. So there is a reference in the immediate aftermath of the election of Donald Trump where Page and Strzok refer to hitting thumb drives and maybe having the first meeting of the secret society. And when you take that in the context of their expressed, not just bias, but their intent to prevent Donald Trump from becoming president in the first place, and then some of the texts that were read in the intro about finishing the job and fixing things, it really does tell a troubling story that we need to investigate.
Well, you are not surprised, I'm sure, that your colleagues across the aisle, the Democrats, don't see it that way. We've got a joint statement from the top Democrats on Judiciary and Intelligence, Jerry Nadler and Adam Schiff, saying this: Republicans are now attacking the FBI in order to undermine Special Counsel Mueller and protect President Trump, but their claims are directly at odds with the facts. So two things there. First of all, are you worried about folks, rank and file, who are working around the clock every day at these key law enforcement agencies, feeling a little beat up by the public criticism? And secondly, do the Democrats have a point?
Well, to the latter, I don't think that the rank and file feel beat up, because a lot of the rank and file that I worked with when I was a federal prosecutor and worked with the FBI are contacting me and say, keep the pressure on. Look, in a big barrel full of apples at a place like the FBI, there's going to be a few rotten ones. The problem here is that some of the rotten apples were at the very top around some of the most important investigations that were going on. With respect to the Democrats, we keep hearing the same thing over and over again. And, all we're doing is following the facts and the evidence. And clearly, as these texts come out, they keep offering explanations for why they're not that bad. But, Shannon, they just look bad.
I want to ask you, too, about your statements that it's possible former FBI Director Comey would be brought back to the Hill for more testimony. You say that there are what you believe could be inconsistencies about different statements he's made regarding the Hillary Clinton email investigation. Could that happen?
It could happen. I think it will happen. And there are inconsistencies. Now, let me be clear. I think former Director Comey was very clear in his testimony. He said that no decision was made to charge Hillary Clinton or to not charge her with mishandling classified information until after her July 2nd, 2016 interview with the FBI. The problem is these texts indicate that Page and Strzok and Lynch and virtually every member of the mid-year exam team, which was the code name for the Hillary Clinton email investigation, knew days, weeks, and in some cases months before that she wasn't going to be charged. And that's simply inconsistent with the testimony that he gave under oath. If all the folks working for the director knew that she wasn't going to be charged, I think the director had to know. And if he knew, why did he give different testimony under oath?
And very quickly, the memo that seems to be making all the headlines, suggesting intelligence, potentially government surveillance, used inappropriately. Those are some of the allegations by those who've seen it. Do you think the memo should go public, and when do you think that would happen?
Well, it could happen relatively quickly. There's a process that's been identified. The problem that I have, or the concern that I have, is it's a process that hasn't been used before. And I do want to be careful with respect to classified information. I want to make sure that processes that are for classifying information and protecting our national security secrets and surveillance tools that have allowed former federal prosecutors and terrorism prosecutors like me to help keep America safe don't get damaged by the people that abuse them. So we do want to hold the folks accountable if there were abuses of the processes and the tools that we give law enforcement and counterintelligence, but we don't want to destroy the tools and processes along the way.
All right, Congressman Ratcliffe, thank you for your time tonight. Good to have you with us.
You bet. Thanks, Shannon.
All right, about 15 minutes ago, President Trump tweeting on this topic saying, quote, "Where are the 50,000 important text messages between FBI lovers?" Lisa Page and Peter Strzok blaming Samsung. Meanwhile, the president says it doesn't bother him that his attorney general has been interviewed by special counsel Robert Mueller.
No, I'm not at all concerned.
Are you concerned about the senior leadership at the FBI? Thanks, everyone.
Let's see how it all works out.
Indeed. Let's turn to Chris Direwald, Fox News politics editor and editor of the Halftime Report for analysis. Great to see you on this Tuesday night.
Dun, 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 dun.
Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so now we find out that Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, has spent hours with the investigators.
Expected would happen, which is normal.
Right, and now we're hearing a push potentially for some specific questions they have for the president as well.
Well, if the president thinks that he's going to get out of this without having to, so the total victory for Trump would be getting away with just doing a paper statement that he and his lawyers can sit down in a room, maybe even without him for some of it, to craft responses.
Interrogatories,
exactly, Counselor, to navigate or circumvent the questions that Mueller's going to put for him. The loss for Trump in this case represents that he gets pushed into a place where he is going to have to sit down and be deposed. We know from prior depositions of Trump in the private sector, those can be interesting spaces. His lawyers want to keep him out of being actually interviewed. They're going to try to find some compromise in between the two that probably looks like a no under oath, let's have a talk, let's be clear, and let's clear the air.
Okay, so in addition, we now have reports behind the scenes, so much leaking all the time, that the FBI director, Christopher Wray, was being pressured by some within the administration, the White House, to get rid of Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, who's been in the middle, people recognize that name, he's been in the middle of all these stories, and essentially that the Attorney General became concerned that the FBI director was going to quit over this. So as that story is playing out, we now have a tweet from the former FBI director saying this, good to read reports of people standing up for what they believe in. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. And he says, attributing that to MLK. He does like to troll.
But it's beyond trolling. It's sanctimony. It's dripping with the sanctimonious former FBI director and you know what? It's the same reason he screwed up as FBI director. It's because he believed that he was the last honest man. He told Diogenes, put out your light. I am he, and I'm the only man who can save the American Republic. And that's hogwash. And he put himself in the wrong position. The reason that Democrats and Republicans ended up thinking that Comey was not a good FBI director was because he inserted himself and was too political and couldn't stop yammering.
Well, and there are a lot of people, okay, as we were also reporting tonight about these missing texts, we talked to the congressman, and Ed was reporting on that, Catherine as well. And there's a piece today, I think it was today, from the Huffington Post saying, listen, if this was about people trying to scheme to get rid of Trump, it just wasn't right. It says the Bureau's handling of the investigation into Clinton's emails produced a slew of negative headlines for her and provided plenty of fodder for Trump and his allies to attack their Democratic opponent. And if FBI officials really were trying to get Clinton elected, they did a terrible job. Because Trump won. I don't know what to tell these Republicans. You won the election. They're not taking it back. You can look for her emails. You can talk about this. You can talk about James Comey. You can talk about whatever you want. Two things that got to happen here. Mueller has to finish his investigation. And you can tell that since he's getting to principals and ultimately to the president, that means he's almost done. Those are the very last things that you do in an investigation. Now, I understand that partisan's going to partisan. And the fact that Republicans are throwing up so much chaff right now, and I mean, you listening to Ron Johnson there, they might have Bigfoot might be in those 55,000. Anything could be in there. And we don't know if we can't see them, but you understand.
Could be full of Sasquatches.
But you understand, or Yeti.
Or Yeti.
What is the plural of Yeti?
Jedi? I think Jedi. I think it stays the same.
But I mean, a lot of these folks, they feel completely justified when they see these things that are talking about insurance policies and secret societies, and we hate Trump, and he's a buffoon, and he's an idiot, and, you know, we know Hillary's going to get exonerated before she's even been interviewed. I mean, those kinds of things raise a lot of red flags for people. Peter
Strzok said they have a problem, which is Peter Strzok has one text that says that if you read it one way, they're the resistance, they're the secret society, they're the other thing. And another text he says, I think this would be a bad move for my career to go into this probe because I think it's not going to find anything. Well, which is it? Now, the point here is take with a grain of salt anything that partisans say about an ongoing investigation like this. Mueller's where the action's at, and you know, the Republicans are still too scared to say that they think Mueller's a crook. So for now, just wait and watch and see, and we'll find out what happens. It's going to be a heck of a scrum when we get there.
It is, and you think he's coming into the home stretch, so we'll stand by.
Welcome home.
Good to see you. Thank you. All right, progressives labeled it the Schumer sellout, and President Trump is tweeting about it late tonight. Yes, he is busy on the Twitters. Feeling the pressure from his left on the deal to end the shutdown, Senator Schumer is doing an about-face on something he said about the border wall, so we're going to debate. Are the two related? Plus, the NFL under fire again, this time for rejecting an ad from a veterans group. It's coming up in our Real News Roundup. And while I was in Israel yesterday, I had a chance to sit down with the man who's been negotiating for the Palestinians for decades. His heated reaction to the Trump administration's latest moves in Israel sure to make waves. It's being called the Cheeseburger Summit. Last Friday, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and President Trump came close to a deal for so-called dreamers. Schumer offering a large increase in spending for the border wall in return. But now Schumer says that offer's off the table, but progressive groups and so-called dreamers are still fuming. So what, if anything, can the Democratic leadership do to win them back?
It's disappointing knowing that certain Democrats voted with a continuing resolution that will not carry a Clean Dream Act.
It's just another form of betrayal. I've lived my life, my entire life in this country. I've pledged allegiance to its flag, and so for them to say that they're not willing to protect us, it's a betrayal.
And another new tweet from the president tonight. He is busy crying. Chuck Schumer fully understands, especially after his humiliating defeat, that if there is no wall, there is no DACA. We must have safety and security together with a strong military for our great people. Speaking of great people, joining us now, political editor at Town Hall, Fox News contributor Guy Benson, and radio talk show host, Fox News contributor Richard Fowler. Great to see both of you tonight.
Good to be here.
Okay, so the president, he's back to calling him crying Chuck Schumer, and he's saying it's a big defeat for him. But we want to play for you a little bit of what the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, has had to say about where we are now.
They're afraid of President Trump. They want to know what he'll do, but he doesn't tell them to do anything, and he usually tells them, you do it yourselves. We get paralysis. We're very pleased with how things came out. We're a lot better off today when it comes to the cause of dreamers than we were 4 or 5 days ago.
How so, Guy?
No, they're not. That's a made-up talking point because they got their butts handed to them in this shutdown that he engineered and accomplished absolutely nothing. I'm someone who supports a DREAM Act and a compromise to increase border security and get the legal situation figured out for these people who are brought here illegally as children through no fault of their own. But the idea that we are closer to a deal because of the shutdown is ludicrous. I think a deal is possible. I think there's a bipartisan desire to get it done, but I think the shutdown made it harder, or at least pushed it back.
What do you think here, Richard? Where are you on the spectrum of thinking that Schumer caved or he accomplished something, or you're mad that he didn't hang in there longer?
I mean, he definitely had a tough needle to string here. But I do think that Democrats, if they were going to go out, if they were going to shut down the government, mind you, Republicans control all three branches, so and Republicans joined Democrats in not voting for the continuing resolution, then I think it would have required them to stay out and have more than just the DREAM Act as one of the measures. I think you have community health centers could be another measure. You have budget caps. So I think there were some things missing. Where I agree with Guy is I think we are farther away from a DREAM Act just because I feel as though there's going to be, and my gut tells me, there's going to be another government shutdown when we come close to this February 8th date, because for whatever the reason, our members of Congress on both sides of the aisle don't seem to want to get anything done unless there is some clock looming.
We're at the edge of a cliff, usually, when they do get something done.
It's like a shot clock looming, and they wait till the fourth quarter to score points. But it doesn't make much sense.
Here's why I think we're farther from a DREAM Act today than before the shutdown. Because Schumer put together and quarterbacked this stupid shutdown that was pointless, he then ticked off the left-wing base for capitulating and walking away from it. So the left is furious at him. They're picketing his private home in Manhattan, and now he has to puff up his chest and say things and do things to try to win them back, which I think will make it more difficult to come to a compromise on DACA and immigration.
I think the one point that I do want to make here is I think if there was a clean DREAM Act bill to hit the Senate floor, that bill would pass. I think if there was a clean,
you think?
I do believe it would pass.
With no border wall or any of that kind of stuff.
I think if there was a clean DREAM Act bill, given where the vote count currently is, given the fact that five Republicans joined Democrats in not voting for the CR, it is very likely that bill would pass by a majority vote. I think if Paul Ryan brought that bill to the floor in the House, it would be some maneuvering, but I think it would be close to passing as well. I think the problem you have is at the president's desk.
Because the president can veto it. And frankly, there shouldn't be a clean DREAM Act. I know that's what the Democrats want. That's what the Dreamers are demanding. They're in no place to demand anything, in my view. In order to make this work, both sides need to get something. It is fair to take care of the Dreamers, but when you create a new amnesty, which is what this would be,
this is not an amnesty.
It would be a form of amnesty. It's
Many
one that
people would view it that way.
I support it. I support
Maybe
this.
semantics for some folks, but
You are making people who are here illegally legal. That's an amnesty. I support this amnesty, but when you do that, let me finish. When you do anything like that, it creates a more powerful incentive for additional illegal immigration. That's what amnesties do historically. So you have to mitigate that with border security.
That's what a lot of people think.
I agree, but I think the distinction with 1986 and today is that these dreamers, I don't think a 2-year-old who crosses the border with their mom can form criminal intent. And I think that's the larger argument. So yes, they came here illegally, but I don't think them and themselves did an illegal act because a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old cannot
not all
form.
criminal acts require intent.
Right, and that's why they're so sympathetic. That's why many of us on the right support it.
It's not amnesty, and I think depending on what this bill looks like, if there is a longer pathway to citizenship, they've done so much of the work. Cool. They've passed a background check. They are working or in college or in our military. They want to be Americans. They want to achieve the American dream.
Would you be okay with the legal status short of citizenship? Either of you? Or do you think that's where it needs to go? No, the full Monty. We're getting the full Monty on the show tonight.
I'd be open
it is
to
after
either
11.
one. But I want to say, the word amnesty is not unto itself a value judgment. I know it's laden with meaning in our political discourse, but it is just a descriptive term that applies to this situation.
And upsets a lot of people. Okay, we got to leave it there, gentlemen. Guy and Richard, good to see you both.
Thank you.
All right, President Trump, he's going to bring America first to an exclusive club that embraces open borders, free trade, and billionaire elitists. Shaping up to be quite a showdown in Davos. And now, after we understand it's up to 190 women are bravely speaking out about abuse by a former doctor. For the U.S. gymnastics team, their parents are speaking out as well because those parents are coming under fire on social media. We'll explain that next. President Trump will be wheels up tomorrow night, heading to the annual World Economic Forum, which kicked off in Davos, Switzerland today. The first sitting president to visit in 18 years will take along his message of America first. Rich Edson's here to tell us how that's going to go over. Apparently, this appearance will not be without controversy. That shouldn't surprise us, Rich.
Not at all, Shannon, and good evening to you. President Trump will travel to the mountains of Switzerland shortly. That's where the World Economic Forum happens, to an alpine resort village populated this week by many of the globalist politicians, executives, and billionaires he has promised to fight against. Summit organizers say their annual event intends to rededicate leaders to developing a shared narrative to improve the state of the world. In that environment, Friday, President Trump addresses the 48th World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland.
Expect this president to go there and show what America First continues to look like on the world stage. He is certainly willing to engage on trade and participate in the global economy. However, he has made very clear that will always benefit Americans.
Claiming that argument, President Trump has already pushed an overhaul of NAFTA, withdrawn the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a 12-nation free trade agreement, or at least it was. The remaining 11 Pacific nations agreed today to move on without the U.S. This week, the administration also announced steep tariffs on imported solar panels and washing machines. Despite the apparent pushback against global integration, the president's economic team claims the administration is working to expand the U.S. international presence.
The U.S. is pulling back from nothing. The U.S. is involved. When the president was out in Asia, he talked about trade agreements and his willingness to have bilateral trade agreements with many of the countries he visited in Asia, and we're more than willing to have bilateral trade agreements.
As for any new trade agreements, Cohen says the administration is starting to work on discussions, though he refused to identify any countries. He says the U.S. trade representative will announce that information when he is ready. Cohen also says the president at Davos will push international companies to expand their presence and investments in the United States and hire more American workers. And as the president travels this time, he does so without the First Lady. The White House says scheduling and logistics will keep First Lady Melania Trump from Davos. Shannon.
All right, we will be covering it around the clock. Thank you very much, Rich.
Thanks.
It's time now for a real news roundup. As you know, Super Bowl 52 is now set. It'll close out a very controversial season for the NFL, and the anthem controversy, it's not over. The league is now under fire yet again, this time for rejecting a proposed ad for the game's program. A veterans group called AmVets wanted to urge people to please stand for our national anthem, but they were turned down. The NFL's reason, quote, the Super Bowl game program has never been a place for advertising that could be considered by some as a political statement. The NFL has long supported the military and veterans and will again salute our service members in the Super Bowl. Meanwhile, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell just talked about the anthem controversy tonight. Here's some of what he said.
We wanted to also listen to our players and understand what it is that they were actually protesting. Our players were all trying to do what's in the best interest of communities that they live in, that they care about, and trying to improve them. And I admire that a great deal. I wish all our players were standing for the national anthem. I always did, and I always told them that. But I also, we really took the time to understand them. And I think we could use a little bit more of that in our society and try to get to a better place.
Also in the world of sports, heartbreaking closure for gymnasts abused by former U.S. Olympic team doctor Larry Nassar. More women speaking out today during Nassar's sentencing hearing on 7 counts of criminal sexual conduct. Their parents are speaking out too amid social media criticism that they should have known what was happening at the training facility.
Your Honor, I would like to take just a minute to address the people following this story on multimedia outlets. Quit shaming and blaming the parents. Trust me, you would not have known, and you would not have done anything differently. So stop.
I was sexually abused by him hundreds of times without gloves or my consent.
You stole my light, Larry Nassar, and I am now taking it back. You were never a real doctor. You did not heal me. You only hurt me.
Nassar's already been sentenced to 60 years in prison on child pornography charges and could get up to 125 years for his serial child abuse when his sentence is announced tomorrow. All right, you heard last night from Vice President Mike Pence about the ambitious timeline for moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. Now tonight, new reaction from a top Palestinian diplomat and an ominous warning about what might happen after we make that move with our embassy. And we'll hear more from the Vice President about the plight of Christians in the Middle East when Fox News at Night continues after this. Vice President Mike Pence wrapping up his time in Jerusalem with a meeting with Israel's President Rivlin, who offered high praise for him in Yiddish, calling him a mensch, which means a person of integrity. Vice President also toured Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Center, where he laid a wreath today before stopping to pray at Jerusalem's Holy Western Wall. The Vice President's faith clearly on display as protecting persecuted religious groups became a focal point of this trip.
The terrorism of ISIS in Iraq and in Syria has torn asunder communities of every faith. United Nations programs were failing to fund reconstruction dollars to historic Christian communities and the communities of other religious minorities in the region. And President Trump made the decision last fall to fund directly from USAID religious-based organizations that are rebuilding Christian communities and communities of religious minorities.
And was that something you were able to discuss in Egypt and Jordan as well?
I was deeply moved as a Christian believer by King Abdullah and President el-Sisi's commitment to ensure that Christian communities are thriving across the Arab world.
The Vice President was slammed by the Palestinians for displaying his faith during this diplomatic mission. I sat down with the top Palestinian negotiator, Saeb Erekat, on our trip. Outside Jerusalem, we visited with him in Ramallah. He had this to say about the Vice President stepping up the timetable for moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem.
I think we are at the worst situation we have been since 1993. Now, with the decision of President Trump to declare Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and then to move of cutting his obligation, by the way, it's not aid to the refugee camps and to UNRWA, we're losing hope. And if you lose hope in this region, it translates into bloodshed. When I say losing hope, keeping hope in the minds of Palestinians and Israelis means saving lives of Israelis and Palestinians. Because desperation will lead to desperate acts. So when the President of the United States decides in a unilateral move to say, I declare Jerusalem as capital of Israel, and then the Vice President in Fox News saying that now, since Jerusalem is off the table, which wasn't even subject to negotiable, let's discuss issues that are negotiable. So when they say these things, for me as a negotiator, it's over. It's over.
Well, meanwhile, the Trump administration is cutting back funding for the United Nations agency that works directly with Palestinian refugees. It's called UNRWA. Vice President Pence and others say it actually breeds dependence on foreign funding and even helps out and benefits members of the terror group Hamas.
This became an international obligation. An international obligation. Now, for the United States to come and cut $65 million of the refugees, Shannon, last year, we spent 18% of our budget, and we're very, very poor budget, on our refugee camps in Lebanon and Syria, because we didn't want the killers and murderers of Daesh and ISIS to recruit our people. Okay, now you move immediately with no notice to cut $65 million. So what will happen? You're going to force these people to emigrate either towards Europe in thousands, or to open the recruitment for those extremist killers and murderers. You just cannot take such steps without weighing the consequences of them. You just cannot. This is a region that may go down the drain. Don't weaken moderates in this region.
I then asked Eric Hatt if he has a message for Americans. Here's what he said about that.
I think it's an American national interest. The U.S. borders are no longer with Canada and Mexico on the two oceans. I think you have more than 100,000 kids in this region. Your borders are everywhere. Making peace between Palestinians and Israelis is a major requirement to defeat extremism.
I also asked Eric Hatt what would bring the Palestinians back to negotiating with the Americans, because he kept saying it's over, it's over. Well, his answer was basically the only thing that would get them back to talks would be for the U.S., for the president to revoke those decisions about moving the embassy to Jerusalem and recognizing it as Israel's capital. So we're going to get reaction to what you just heard from the Palestinians' top diplomat, from a former top Israeli diplomat. What did Saeb Erekat mean when he talked about desperation and bloodshed after President Trump announced that embassy move to Jerusalem? Former Ambassador Dori Gold joins us next from Jerusalem. All right, so we just heard from top Palestinian negotiator Dr. Saeb Erekat, who said, quote, if you lose hope in this region, it transfers to bloodshed. He was referring to the U.S. unilaterally declaring it would move our embassy to Jerusalem sooner than expected. Let's bring in Dori Gold, president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs and former director general of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Great to have you with us, sir.
Good to be with you, Shannon.
All right, what do you make of what, if you were able to hear the interview there? Because I continually pushed Dr. Erekat on this idea that this administration, the Trump administration, was leaving open the idea that all the parties there are the ones who will decide the borders, the nuances, the custodianship of the holy sites won't change, that kind of thing. And he said it didn't matter. What they heard about Jerusalem, the headline was the U.S. was recognizing it as the capital and moving the embassy, and the nuance didn't mean anything beyond that.
Well, he's a professional, and he should know better. But what I'm really disturbed by in that interview is the fact that Saeb Erekat is talking about bloodshed, violence, and that's not the way to conduct diplomacy. That is not the way to speak to the American people. That if America decides X, the Palestinians are going to explode and have some kind of reaction of rage. And I think he has to answer specifically the concerns, the increasing concerns of the international community on Jerusalem, on refugees, where there are very specific matters that have been raised.
Well, and Erekat, to me, kept saying that he thought that this was some political pressure here domestically on the president, and that the president wasn't thinking about the parties there in the region as much as he was answering to his base. We have this now Pew poll that talks about who is more supportive of the Israelis versus the Palestinians. The Republicans overwhelmingly, 79% of them, sympathize more with Israel. The Democrats are divided here. They say 27% Israel, 25% Palestinians. About half of them say both or neither, or they don't know. Do you think President Trump made a domestic political decision in making this? And is that the right way to attack something that is really critical to the stability of your region?
Well, there are professional assessments that have been made in the president's decision. This is not all politics by any means. Take, for example, the issue of UNRWA, the refugee organization. There's a lot of people who have observed that UNRWA is not working. You know, take, for example, how many refugees were there at the end of World War II in Europe? Tens of millions. How many refugees are there today? Zero. Palestinian refugees, just a few years later in 1948-49, how many were there? 500,000? 600,000? Today, how many are there? 5 million, according to UNRWA. Well, that has to do with the fact that UNRWA has different accounting rules than all the other refugee organizations in the world. The United States has a right to raise questions like that. And again, you don't have to hear threats of violence because those hard questions are being asked.
What do you make of his response when we talked about this issue of the aid, $60 million of aid, U.S. aid, being cut from UNRWA, and they're by far the biggest donor to that fund and that effort? You know, Eric said to me that he worries because so many of the people are completely dependent on it. You talk about the huge number of people that are, and he worried, especially among the young people, if they lose those benefits and those lifelines, that they will be more ripe for recruitment by the terrorists. Is that a legitimate argument to you about that aid issue?
Well, you know, they have been on notice for a while. In previous Israeli operations in the Gaza Strip, which came about because there were rocket attacks on us, what do we find in various UNRWA facilities? Hamas weapons. That's unacceptable. There are standards for how organizations like UNRWA should be run. Meet the standards and get the money.
All right, former Ambassador Dori Gold, we appreciate you being up so early there for us in Jerusalem and spending your time with us. We appreciate it.
You have good coffee in the studio.
Yes, you do. And our big thanks to everyone there in the Jerusalem Bureau who made our trip possible over the last couple of days. We appreciate all of your help. It was an interesting and eye-opening experience to be there on the ground. By the way, most watched, most trusted, and most grateful that you spent this evening with us. Good night. It's good to be back in Washington. I'm Shannon Bream.